The auction yard smelled of dust, sweat, and rusted iron. A hot wind blew across the pens, rattling loose boards and lifting swirls of sand into the faces of the crowd. Horses shifted nervously behind the fences, their hooves drumming a restless rhythm, but one stallion stood apart. Tethered to a rough post, ribs jutting against his dull coat, the Mustang lowered his head, as though every breath cost him effort. The scars across his flank told their own silent history, deep ridges etched like maps of battles fought and lost. A boy nearby laughed at the sight, tossing a stone that skittered across the dirt. "Worthless," he muttered, and others joined in the chorus. The auctioneer slapped his ledger against his palm, shouting numbers that echoed flat against the barn walls. Buyers leaned on railings, their eyes scanning for profit, not for pain. Their glances skipped quickly over the Mustang. Broken animals held no value here. A few men chuckled at his thin frame, one calling out, "That one wouldn't pull a child's cart." Another smirked, "Better for dog meat." The horse flicked an ear but gave no other response, as though he had already endured enough cruelty to grow immune. From the edge of the crowd, Ethan watched in silence. His hat shaded his face, though the lines of weariness were etched deep into his skin. He was not a man who wasted words. The world had already taken too many from him. A ranch once thriving now lay in ruin, debts pressing harder than the summer sun, and silence filled the house where laughter had once lived. Still, his eyes lingered on the horse no one wanted. Something in the way the Mustang stood, defeated yet unbowed, pulled at him. Bidding rolled on for stronger stock, glossy maras, tall geldings, the kind that promised easy obedience. Coins clinked, voices rose, deals were struck. Yet Ethan felt his focus narrowing, shutting out the noise until there was only the scarred Mustang and the strange glimmer in its eyes. For beneath the droop of exhaustion, there flashed, just once, just briefly, a spark. Defiance. Life refusing to surrender. The auctioneer grew impatient. "Next up, this sorry thing." He waved his hand dismissively at the Mustang. "Wild caught, half broke, near useless. Start the bid at 20. Silence. The crowd shifted, uninterested. 10. More silence. Someone snorted, "Not even worth the rope he's tied with." Ethan's hand rose. His voice, low but steady, carried just enough. 5. Laughter rippled through the yard. The auctioneer, eager to move on, dropped the gavel. "Sold. To the fool in the hat." The mocking did not follow Ethan home, but clung to him in memory. As he led the Mustang into his trailer, he felt the weight of stares pressing his back, all certain he had wasted even those few coins. The animal resisted every step, hooves scraping metal, eyes rolling white. He kicked once against the wall, the sound ringing like iron striking iron. Ethan steadied the rope, speaking quietly, though the horse did not listen. Back at the ranch, the air was still, the buildings weathered. The corral stood empty, waiting. Ethan opened the gate and released his purchase, stepping back as the Mustang burst free. Dust rose in clouds as the stallion charged the perimeter, muscles trembling with effort, breath rasping harsh in his throat. Then he wheeled, ears pinned, teeth bared. He was not tame, not even broken. He was fury bound in flesh. Ethan leaned on the rail, studying him. Doubt crept in like shadow. What had he done? He had little enough left, time, money, strength. Why throw it at a beast that wanted no master? For a moment he imagined returning to the auction yard, demanding a refund, though he knew that was impossible. He almost wished the horse had run when the gate first opened. But the stallion remained, circling, every step a challenge. That night, as Ethan lay in his bed, the silence pressed heavy. Sleep came slow, dragging him into memories he tried to bury. His father's voice returned, worn and kind, whispering across time. Sometimes the broken ones have the most fight in them. Don't be fooled by scars. He woke with the words clinging to him like smoke. Morning broke pale and cold. Ethan carried a bucket to the corral. The Mustang stood distant, head high, eyes fixed. Ethan set the feed down and stepped back, waiting. Minutes stretched. Finally the stallion approached, muscles tense, as if expecting betrayal. He ate, each bite sharp, deliberate. Ethan exhaled quietly, a breath he hadn't realized he held. It was a start fragile as a thread, but trust was not given easily. Days passed, each one a trial. The horse refused touch, striking at the rails with iron hooves. He ignored Ethan's calm words, lashed out when approached. Yet beneath every act of resistance, Ethan glimpsed something else, fear, not hatred. And in that fear, the same spark he had seen at the auction, flickering stubbornly. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Ethan entered the corral, carrying nothing. No rope, no stick. He simply stood silent. The Mustang snorted, pawed the ground, then charged. Dust exploded upward, hooves thundering. Ethan did not move. The stallion stopped inches away, breath hot, eyes burning like coals. For a heartbeat, neither man nor beast yielded. Then the horse tossed his head, a wild challenge, and wheeled away. Ethan's hands shook as he left the corral, though he hit it well. He knew the risk. One wrong step, one falter of courage, and the Mustang would crush him. Yet something inside him stirred, a faint echo of hope he thought long buried. This was no worthless creature. This was fire hidden under ash. That night the wind rose, rattling shutters, carrying the cry of coyotes across the dark fields. Ethan stood by the window, listening, and his gaze fell toward the corral. The stallion's silhouette moved against the moonlight, pacing restlessly. Ethan's chest tightened with a strange certainty. Their battles were only beginning. And when dawn came, the Mustang would test him again. The morning air carried a chill, though the sun glowed faint behind thin clouds. Ethan leaned against the corral fence, watching the Mustang pace with restless energy. Every movement was sharp, every glance fierce. The horse had eaten, survived, but he was far from tame. Ethan knew force would shatter what little ground they had gained. He chose patience, even if patience meant enduring days of silence and resistance. Hours slipped away as Ethan sat on the fence rail, saying nothing, doing nothing, simply existing in the stallion's presence. The horse tossed his head in irritation, circled, pawed the earth, but eventually his anger dulled into curiosity. By late afternoon he stood nearer, ears flicking toward Ethan. It was no victory to boast of, but it was a thread in the rope of trust he was trying to weave. That night, Ethan whispered to himself as he closed the barn door, "We'll get there. One step." His voice sounded strange in the emptiness, as though he were speaking more for his own reassurance than for the horse. The following days brought more trials. When Ethan carried a halter, the Mustang exploded into fury, bucking against the rails until dust rose like smoke. Ethan dropped the rope and waited, heart pounding but hands steady. He refused to meet violence with violence. Instead, he began bringing nothing into the pen, only his calm presence. Slowly, the horse stopped seeing him as predator. On the fifth morning, a small shift occurred. Ethan extended his hand, palm open, grain resting across his skin. The stallion snorted, hesitated, then stretched his neck. His teeth brushed Ethan's palm as he seized the feed. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but left Ethan's chest aching with relief. He let out a shaky laugh, barely more than a breath. "Good boy." He named him that evening. Standing in the fading light, he studied the stallion's eyes, dark, yet burning with a strange brightness. A memory surfaced of wildfires sweeping the plains years ago, the way embers glowed long after flames died. The name came quietly certain, Ghost Fire. From that moment, the horse was no longer a nameless burden, but a companion in the making. Ghost Fire, a creature scarred, stubborn, and alive. Yet naming him did not ease the work. Trust came in fragments, easily lost. A misstep, a sudden sound, and Ghost Fire reverted to rage. Ethan carried bruises from near misses, his ribs sore from one wild kick that grazed him. Neighbors noticed the struggle. They leaned on their fences when Ethan passed, shaking their heads. "That horse'll kill you," one said. Another added, "Should have let him rot where you found him." Ethan offered no answer, but their words lodged like thorns. One evening he sought counsel from Harris, the retired horseman who lived beyond the ridge. The old man listened in silence as Ethan described Ghost Fire's defiance, his scars, his fire. Finally Harris said, "A horse remembers. Pain, cruelty, it brands deeper than iron. But they can also remember kindness, if you give them reason." His gaze hardened. "Wild ones don't bend to chains. You can't break him. You'll have to earn him." Ethan carried those words home like a weight and a promise. That night he sat outside the corral, leaning against the post, watching Ghost Fire stand against the sky. He wondered if perhaps he, too, had been waiting for someone to earn his trust again. The days turned into weeks. Progress unfolded in moments. Ghost Fire allowing Ethan to brush the dust from his coat, Ghost Fire standing near, without bolting, Ghost Fire lowering his head when Ethan entered the corral. Each act was a stone placed on the fragile bridge between them. Ethan's own spirit shifted with each step forward, as though the horse's healing mirrored his own. Still, the past clung to the Mustang like shadow. One afternoon, as Ethan worked him gently with a rope, Ghostfire reared violently, eyes wide with terror. The scars along his flank shone raw beneath the sunlight, and Ethan understood. Stories from neighbors returned, rumors of wranglers who captured wild herds, of cruelty inflicted to break their spirit. Ghostfire had not been born angry, he had been made that way. Ethan's throat tightened. He dropped the rope and stood still, letting Ghostfire's terror burn itself out. "No one's hurting you again," he murmured when the stallion's sides heaved with exhaustion. His words carried no power yet, but he swore them as truth. That night, coyotes prowled near the ranch. Their cries split the dark, sharp and hungry. Ethan grabbed his lantern and stepped into the yard. The corral gate rattled. Ghostfire charged the fence, ears pinned, teeth bared, defending territory that was not even his by nature. The predators scattered into the night, their howls fading. Ethan stood frozen, lantern flickering in his hand, all washing through him. The horse could have run. The fence was weak enough. Yet Ghostfire had stayed, chosen to fight beside him instead of fleeing. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to believe that something greater tied them together. The following days carried a new rhythm. Ethan began leading Ghostfire beyond the corral, a rope loosely in hand. The horse resisted, planting hooves like anchors, but with patience he followed. Step by step, field by field, Ethan walked him across the land. They moved slowly, but they moved. At dusk, Ethan would release him again, watching as the stallion galloped free, circling back instead of vanishing into the horizon. Neighbors noticed the change. Some mocked more loudly, accusing Ethan of wasting hours on a lost cause. Yet others grew quiet when they saw Ghostfire's strides lengthen, his coat begin to shine with health, his eyes flash brighter. A rumor spread that perhaps the old rancher had found something rare in that scarred Mustang. Ethan ignored the talk. His focus remained on the creature before him. Each evening he brushed Ghostfire's mane. Each morning he fed him with steady hands. The horse still flinched at sudden noises, still bristled at any attempt to saddle, but his fury no longer consumed every breath. It had become something else, energy waiting to be given purpose. One sunset, as the sky burned orange, Ethan dared more. He placed his hand gently against Ghostfire's neck, waiting for the inevitable recoil. The horse trembled, snorted, but did not move away. For the first time, Ethan felt the warmth of living muscle beneath his palm. The moment lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. He exhaled, voice breaking into the quiet. "We're not done yet, Ghostfire. Not by a long mile." As darkness fell, the stallion lifted his head toward the horizon, ears pricked, eyes sharp. Something in his posture spoke of battles still to come. Ethan followed his gaze and knew the journey ahead would demand more than trust. It would demand faith. And faith was not something he had held for a very long time. The winter winds eased, and the valley filled with the scent of thawing earth. Ethan stood at the edge of the pasture, watching Ghostfire stretch into a gallop. The stallion's strides grew longer, surer, each muscle rippling with strength. No trace of the broken animal remained. The fire hidden beneath scars now burned in full blaze. Ethan felt a stirring in his chest, part pride, part disbelief. They had both come further than anyone had thought possible. But the world had not forgotten its doubts. When Ethan rode into town for supplies, whispers followed him. Men shook their heads, women muttered about foolish risks. At the feed store, one rancher leaned close and sneered, "That beast is a wild storm. Sooner or later, he'll tear you apart." Ethan said nothing, only tightened his grip on the sack of grain. Words no longer cut, as they once had. Ghostfire's progress was proof enough. Then came the challenge. A wealthy breeder, Caldwell, stepped forward one afternoon when Ethan was trading hay. His hat was polished, his boots clean, and his voice carried the arrogance of one who had never known hunger. "They say you've got that scarred Mustang running like the wind," he said, each syllable sharpened with mockery. "If he's truly worth a damn, prove it at the spring derby." The store fell silent. Eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for his answer. He met Caldwell's gaze and shook his head. "We're not ready." Laughter erupted. Caldwell clapped him on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "Of course you're not. Broken stock never is." The words echoed long after Ethan left, heavy as stones in his pocket. That night he lay awake, listening to Ghostfire's breathing outside the window. He thought of his father's farm, of dreams buried under debt, of every failure whispered behind his back. Perhaps the Derby was not about victory. Perhaps it was about reclaiming something he had lost long ago. The next dawn, he saddled Ghostfire with trembling hands. The horse balked, ears flat, muscles tense. Ethan spoke softly, guiding him, adjusting, until finally Ghostfire stood still. He mounted without force, balanced carefully, the leather creaking beneath him. For a moment the world held its breath. Then Ghostfire surged forward, not in rebellion but in motion, carrying Ethan across the open fields. Wind tore past his face, stinging his eyes, but he laughed aloud for the first time in years. Training became their rhythm. Each day brought new trials, tight turns, sharp sprints, sudden halts. Ghostfire fought bits and reins, so Ethan discarded them, choosing instead to ride bareback, guiding with touch and trust. The stallion responded as though they shared one breath, one heartbeat. They leapt fences, raced the wind, moved with a unity that startled even Ethan. He realized he was not taming the horse, he was freeing him, and in that freedom, finding his own. Still, doubts gnawed at the edges. The Derby was not a quiet test in fields. It was thunderous, chaotic, filled with polished riders and seasoned champions. Could a scarred Mustang, once beaten and abandoned, hold his own against bloodlines bred for glory? Ethan wrestled with the question nightly, staring into darkness. Ghostfire answered in his own way, by running harder, by refusing to yield, by proving with every stride that scars were not weakness, but strength refined. As the Derby drew closer, the town buzzed. Some mocked Ethan's boldness, betting against him before he had even entered. Others whispered curiosity, wondering if the story of the broken Mustang might hold more than pity. Ethan ignored the noise. His focus narrowed to Ghostfire's hooves pounding earth, to the rhythm of breath between them, to the silent promise they shared. One evening, on the eve of registration, Ethan found himself at Harris's porch. The old horseman rocked slowly in his chair, eyes studying the horizon. Ethan spoke of the challenge, of his fears. Harris listened, then said simply, "A race is not about beating others. It's about proving to yourself you can finish. You and that horse already carry more spirit than most men dream of. Don't waste it hiding." The words struck deep, steadying something inside Ethan that had wavered too long. The decision was made. At sunrise, he signed their names into the Derby roster, Ethan Cole and Ghostfire. Training intensified. Ethan pushed himself as hard as he pushed the stallion. Muscles ached, calluses tore, lungs burned, but he welcomed the pain. It meant progress. Ghostfire's speed grew astonishing, his endurance unbreakable. Together they flew across meadows until even hawks seemed slower overhead. Ethan knew they would never match the polished elegance of pedigree horses, but they carried something else, raw defiance, born of survival. The night before the race, a storm rolled over the valley. Thunder cracked like whips, lightning split the sky. Ghostfire paced the corral, restless energy sparking from every stride. Ethan stood in the rain, soaked through, and laid a hand on the stallion's neck. "Tomorrow they'll laugh when they see us," he murmured. "But you and me, we know the truth. We don't run to prove them wrong. We run because we were never meant to crawl." Ghostfire snorted, breath steaming against the cold. Ethan felt a shiver, not from the storm, but from the weight of what was coming. When dawn broke, the world was washed clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. Ethan saddled Ghostfire with steady hands, the leather gleaming with oil. He wore no polished gear, no shining boots, only his worn hat, his calloused hands, and a quiet determination that burned brighter than pride. The Derby grounds bustled with life. Riders in fine silks paraded their horses, sleek and tall, muscles gleaming under perfect coats. Crowds filled the stands, voices rising like waves. Laughter followed Ethan as he led Ghostfire through the gate. "That scarred nag. He'll be out before the first turn." Others scoffed, shaking their heads at the sight of a Mustang among thoroughbreds. Ethan heard every word, but answered none, his gaze fixed on the track, wide and waiting. Ghostfire stood calm, ears twitching, eyes steady. For the first time, Ethan sensed no fear, only anticipation. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, calling riders to their marks. Ethan mounted, gripping bareback with quiet confidence. Around him, riders sneered, their saddles gleaming, their bridles polished. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the heart beneath him, steady and strong. The starter raised the flag. The crowd roared. Horses pawed the ground, breath steaming, ready to explode forward. Ethan lowered himself close to Ghostfire's neck, whispering, "Show them who you are." The flag dropped. Hooves thundered, earth shook, the race began. Ghostfire stumbled. Gasps erupted from the stands, laughter cutting sharp. Ethan gritted his teeth, steadying him, whispering calm. The stallion surged, recovering, lungs pulling fire into motion. Dust swallowed them. Horses pressed ahead, the world a blur of color and noise. But Ghostfire's ears pricked, his stride lengthened, his eyes blazed. And Ethan knew, in that instant, they were only just beginning. The track thundered with sound. Horses surged forward in a storm of motion, sleek bodies pressing into the first curve, riders leaning low, spurs glinting in the sunlight. Ethan held tight against Ghostfire's neck, feeling the stallion's heart hammering like a drum. They were behind already, swallowed by dust, mocked before they had truly begun. The crowd's jeers cut sharp through the roar. Out before the first turn, someone shouted. Ethan clenched his jaw, whispering through the rush of wind, "Steady. Trust me." Ghostfire's stride stumbled again as polished thoroughbreds crowded them, hooves clipping dangerously close. But instead of panic, Ethan felt a surge of strength beneath him, raw and untamed. The stallion stretched forward, lungs dragging air, legs devouring ground. Slowly, the distance between them and the pack began to close. Ethan leaned lower, bareback grip holding firm, his voice a steady rhythm against the chaos. "That's it. Show them." The first turn loomed. Riders fought for position, their whips cutting through the air, their mounts screaming under pressure. Ethan gave no such command. He loosened his grip, allowing Ghostfire to choose his own line. The Mustang swung wide, hooves kicking dirt into the stands. Gasps rose as they slipped past two riders boxed in against the rail. It was not grace but instinct, not calculation but freedom. And it worked. By the halfway mark, Ghostfire's coat glistened with sweat, his muscles alive with power. They were no longer last. Ethan heard the disbelief ripple through the crowd, a wave of voices climbing from mockery to awe. Still, ahead loomed the leader, Caldwell's champion stallion, tall, perfect, bred for nothing but victory. Caldwell's confident grin flashed over his shoulder, as if to remind Ethan of his place. But Ethan's eyes stayed forward. He was not racing Caldwell. He was racing himself, the years of failure, the weight of every voice that had called him broken. The third turn brought chaos. A rider clipped too close, his horse stumbling, legs tangling. Dirt exploded as one animal went down. Ethan's breath caught. Ghostfire veered with lightning reflex, leaping sideways, clearing the fallen without breaking stride. The crowd erupted, shock and amazement colliding into cheers. Ethan clung with burning thighs, his hands gripping mane, his heart pounding with pride. Ghostfire had not hesitated. He had chosen survival, chosen the path forward. Now the final stretch stretched before them, straight and long, a corridor of noise and expectation. Caldwell's stallion thundered at the front, mane flying, hooves striking rhythm like war drums. Behind, the pack fought fiercely for second. Ethan whispered once more, soft certain, "It's just us now. Run free." And Ghostfire answered. His stride deepened, his neck stretched, his eyes blazing with a fire that silenced every doubt. The ground seemed to vanish beneath him, each bound carrying them closer. They overtook one, then another, leaving disbelief in their wake. The roar of the crowd swelled to a frenzy. Ethan's vision blurred with dust and wind, but he felt it, the unity, the bond, the truth of everything they had endured. Side by side they reached Caldwell. The polished stallion's muscles gleamed, his pace relentless. Caldwell lashed his whip, urging more, sneering as he glanced at Ethan. But Ethan did not raise hand nor voice. He leaned closer, loosening reins, giving Ghostfire the choice. For a heartbeat the world slowed, the crowds roared distant, time stretched thin. Then Ghostfire surged, drawing from a well deeper than breeding, deeper than training. He drew from survival, from scars, from a spirit that had refused to die. Neck and neck they flew, shadows stretching across the track. The finish line blazed white ahead. Ethan closed his eyes for a breath, surrendering to trust. And when he opened them, Ghostfire was ahead, mane whipping his face, hooves pounding like thunder. They crossed first. The world exploded. The stands shook with cheers, disbelief turning to thunderous acclaim. Dust swirled around them as Ethan pulled Ghostfire to a slowing trot, his chest heaving, his body trembling. He slid from the stallion's back, knees weak, hands shaking, tears blurring his vision. He buried his face against Ghostfire's neck, whispering words no one else could hear. "You did it. You showed them. You showed me." Caldwell stormed past, his expression dark with humiliation. But the crowd ignored him. They surged forward, voices crying Ghostfire's name, as if it had always been known. The horse stood proud, nostrils flaring, eyes blazing with the same defiance that had once earned him scorn. Now it earned him reverence. Reporters shouted, townsfolk pressed against the rail, children pointed with shining eyes. But Ethan saw none of it. For him, the victory was not in the cheers or the prize. It was in the quiet truth that the broken horse had never been broken, only waiting for someone to see the fire beneath the scars. When the announcer declared their victory, the sound barely reached Ethan's ears. He felt only Ghostfire's steady breath, warm against his skin. He remembered the auction yard, the laughter, the pity, the voices calling the Mustang worthless. He remembered his own doubts, his sleepless nights. All of it had led here, to this moment of undeniable triumph. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped low, Ethan led Ghostfire to an open field beyond the track. The stallion tossed his head, restless with energy still unspent. Ethan unclipped the rope and stepped back. For a moment, Ghostfire stood still, ears twitching. Then he bolted, mane blazing, galloping free, across the wide horizon. Ethan watched, heart swelling with something he had not felt in years, hope. The world would remember the race, the upset, the miracle. But Ethan knew the real story was simpler. It was about trust given instead of taken, about scars that had become strength, about a man and a horse who had found redemption together. As Ghostfire circled back, slowing, returning willingly to stand beside him, Ethan smiled through tears. He laid a hand against the stallion's neck and whispered, "We're not broken anymore. We never were." The last light of day stretched across the valley, painting both man and horse in gold. Together they stood, not as master and beast, but as equals, bound by something no one could ever see, yet everyone could feel. And as Ethan turned toward home, his voice carried softly, almost lost to the wind. Sometimes the world throws you away. But sometimes that's the only way you learn to rise. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day. Tales of second chances, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that change us forever.